What about Grush's witness list? 14-year career intelligence officer turned whistleblower David Grusch in July of 2023 testified to United States Congressional Oversight Committee and testified to the existence of UFO crash retrieval and reverse engineering programs. And when questioned, he testified that some of his firsthand witnesses were working on this program still or had previously. Welcome back to Expanded Knowledge. And in this video, we're going to be unpacking information basically of just exploring this question of what about Grush's witness list, right? Meaning he had what he stated multiple times was 40 witnesses that had firsthand knowledge or experience of this alleged program, these alleged programs. And basically, when he testified under oath, some congressional members said, "Can we get the names? Can we get the locations?" And Grush said that he would tell them in a SCIF, which is Secured Classified Information Facility. However, since then, July of 2023, that's never happened. And there's a hearing now that's occurring next month. The date's been the date's been named as November 13th, and that's right after the election. So this should be pretty interesting to see what happens as long as this hearing still goes through. And they're supposed to be chaired by Representative Nancy Mace, who we'll see a clip from in a second, actually, when she was questioning Grush. And so this particular representative definitely has an assertive approach to investigating this as Congress taking on its role of overseeing the executive branch, the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, so forth. So anyway, that's what I wanted to ask before this hearing happens is what's going on with these 40 firsthand witnesses? Like, it should be a simple process. But anyway, we have a lot of information here that I'm going to be unpacking. So it's a lot of information, actually. And we're probably going to just cap it off at 45 minutes to an hour and see how much we get through here. But let us, without further ado, get into this presentation. Where are Grush's witnesses? So yes, as we know, David Grush submitted a 4-year investigation in his role on the UAP task force, which was a government program to investigate information about UAP, which is like the new, more all-encompassing term for UFOs. And Grush did that, and he had access to special access programs, which are basically these deep black military programs, meaning they have a cover name and nobody knows what they do. It's just a name on a sheet, and that's about as much oversight as they get from Congress, and in some cases, if that, right? But anyway, and that's all supposed to be for national security. So anyway, Grush had this perspective of going and investigating this, as he was authorized to do by Congress. And that's where he had people beginning to talk to him and tell him about what allegedly was going on behind the scenes in the UFO issue, right? That's been covered up since the late 40s, at least. So let's move along here then. And let's listen to a clip from Nancy Mace, who will be chairing the hearing next month. And this is a short clip of her questioning Grush in last year's hearing.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
And was this documentary evidence, this video, photos, eyewitness? Like, how would that be determined?
The specific documentation I would have to talk to you in a skiff about.
And that's it in a nutshell. Basically, he hasn't been allowed to give that information directly to Congress. So what Congress did do, or at least those Congress members, is that they went ahead and inquired as to what, if they could get the names and the locations. So they gave it to a gentleman named Thomas Monheim. All right, so really, and that's in the picture in the bottom there. This is where Grush submitted his information to. And so if anyone would have the full file on exactly what David Grush's 40 whistleblowers have attested to, because that's a lot of people, that's a lot of stories, that's a lot of experiences being, attested to on this topic. And so that information must be fascinating. And that gentleman down there on the bottom would be the one that has that information. So that just, for me, from my perspective, right, it's like that makes me think, who is this guy? Because that's pretty crazy to be the one that has that information, as everyone else on the outside, like, we don't know. We don't know. And that must be pretty fascinating. So who is Thomas Monheim? Well, doing some digging, we can get a basic background, although there's not a ton of information out there. There is some. And he went to Ivy League school, University of Pennsylvania, and interestingly studied computer mathematics, but then became a lawyer and went to the National War College, and he was a colonel in the Air Force Reserves. Further back in his background, he worked for the U.S. Department of Justice, worked during the Bush administration as the associate counsel to the president, and then down here, he worked at a company called King and Spalding, a firm called King and Spalding, and this is quite interesting, actually. The information about this firm that he was a senior associate at early on in his career. This is basically a global financial firm that represents, those are their clients, Fortune 500 companies, international businesses, government entities, financial institutions. So that's all of the major power structures, especially the financial institutions at the top of the power pyramid, if we were to break it down like that. And interestingly, they also have a tie to the energy law. And as you see in the green highlight there, the major oil and gas companies. So they've been involved with that. So that does have some significance when we think about the kind of people that Monheim has worked with in his career. Now he's in this extremely powerful position, I would presume to call it very powerful, where he has sitting on this information of David Grush. And, in some degree, it's up to him and what his office does as to what happens, I would think. And here we see a little bit of some scandals with these companies as well. Some of the details there, pharmaceutical firms, tobacco companies that have drawn some public scrutiny. So I don't know what the details are there, but we could see, quite a network that he may be kind of based in and representing. Now, moving through and just Googling him, I came across this, and it was a very unreliable website, I have to say. There was no really clear information about where these claims were coming from. As you see in the second bullet point, the website was called Capital Hellway. And it said something about graduate studies in there, but it seemed but it did return really high on the Google search, which is interesting that it ranked high like that. I don't know if this is just some kind of propaganda against Monheim or if there's any veracity to the claims, but I think it's significant that it's out there, basically accusing him of, as is highlighted there in the first bullet point, accusing him of willfully and unlawfully concealing corruption by senior executives across the U.S. government. And I don't know if that's true, right? But you can't really get much information else about this guy. But we're going to take that into consideration. And I don't know. That doesn't seem to be the full story. A little more background. Monheim was a U.S. Air Force colonel in the reserves. And in the second point here, and this is very significant actually, he served as the general counsel for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And the reason that that is significant is because David Grusch was working at the same agency as a senior intelligence officer. So that's interesting if they may have known each other or something like that, or maybe are in similar circles with certain information when we get to the core of what is going on. And actually, off of that point, one of the only, if not the only time I've seen him like sort of quoted in the media or paraphrased by an article in the press is this one here. And this is from Law and National Security. Top government lawyer says Intel revolution is underway. And, my question here was kind of, did Monheim know things before Grush already, having worked at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency? And here's what the article is quoted as saying. Monheim identified outer space as the primary driver of the geospatial intelligence revolution, as space capabilities have become more accessible to countries, industries, and individuals. So he seems to, on the record, have an interest in outer space and what he calls an intelligence revolution. So that's a pretty interesting connection that I never really found before I, sort of took on this question of like, what's going on with these witnesses? And then I just think this is the guy who has all the information on the witnesses. In theory, he would have more than anyone as relates to David Grush's unaltered, raw case file data on his claims, because everyone after that I would think would be, another layer and they could classify stuff. But I'm sure there's higher authorities that get fully read in. But anyway, we digress here. Now we're going to talk about when Congress, the people who had that hearing from members of the House Oversight Committee, or some of them not even just affiliated with it, and they wrote to Thomas Monheim, Inspector General of Intelligence, and asked him for certain things. There's a letter. It came from Representative Burchett, Moskowitz, Luna, and some others. And they basically said, hey, Grush, as we see in the purple there, provided his information to the Intelligence Community Inspector General's office, Monheim's office, and that was the names or the titles of individuals with firsthand knowledge or direct access to UAP crash retrieval programs and the reverse engineering programs. And so that is what they were asking for in this case. Now, next up here, they essentially ask for the names of the people involved in these programs and the locations that it is taking place. And then what happens is Inspector General Monheim responds to the Congress members, and it was Burchett, Moskowitz, Luna, Nancy Mace, who's going to be here chairing the next hearing, Eric Burleson, and Andy Ogles. And Monheim writes a very lawyer response. And but within that document, there is a lot of detail that really becomes important, right? When we're thinking about the fact that Congress directly said, and this is on the record, right? This is like the historical record in front of us, that can you give us these people, the names, the locations? And then he responds, and now there's nothing else until now. So that's going to be what we get into next. All right, gonna try something a little different and just take a little break and let a little musical interlude before we come back. All right. All right. So let's bring it back now. And let's come back over to our presentation here. Now, this is not the most kind of how should I say? It's not the most engaging necessarily thing to have to do, is to have to break down this lawyer terminology to come out of what was his response to when asked, like, can we get the names and the locations? But if we take it step by step, as I did when I was just researching this, I think it's worth understanding this issue at its, kind of foundation of the primary sources here. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about it here. The first thing he's saying is that Grush's case went through the urgent concern process, which he labels the law there and everything, and basically specifying that in that the information gets sent, as it says in the last highlight there, to the Congressional Intelligence Committees. All right. And this is the definition of an urgent concern. Serious or flagrant problems, abuses, or violations related to the funding, administration, or operation of an intelligence activity under the DNI's authority. Director of National Intelligence is what DNI stands for. And number 2, false statements or the willful withholding of material facts from Congress about an intelligence activity, or retaliation against employees for making lawful disclosures related to an urgent concern. And here I'd like to clarify a point. A lot of people on the further kind of skeptical end of the spectrum say that Grush's claims, which we know were deemed credible and urgent, that some people have argued that it was only the retaliation claims that were deemed credible and urgent. But even if you were to say that that's all it was, and his claims about UFOs and all that wasn't credible and urgent, then you'd still have to ask the question, why would he be getting retaliation for sharing this information if there was nothing real to it? But there are people that argue, the full-on skeptical side of this, that there's like absolutely nothing to it. I think that it's in between. And you have to remember the other details about David Grush's claims. He said not only that he found the evidence that this was really happening, but he said he also found evidence of a sophisticated disinformation campaign targeting the American public that's been going on for decades, ever since this issue started. So that's important to keep in mind when we remember that his case was deemed credible and urgent by Inspector General Thomas Monheim, who we were checking out in the earlier slides. Here's a little bit about the whistleblower process that David Grusch went through. Basically, It's submitted to the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community Office, and they have 14 days to assess whether the complaint is credible. And if it is, then they notify the DNI. Then the DNI has 7 days to then forward the information to the Congressional Intelligence Committees. Okay? And so that's how the information got passed in David Grush's case. Inspector General Monheim deemed it credible and urgent under the urgent concern qualifications that we just saw earlier. And then the Department of National Intelligence then forwarded it to the Congressional Intelligence Committee. So that would be the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee. Those would be the Congressional Intelligence Committees. And technically, the Speaker of the House, the Senate Majority and Minority Leader, the House Speaker and Minority Leader are two, and then the chair and co-chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee. That's what's called the Gang of Eight, and they would get briefed on the most classified material of everyone else in the 535-member Congress, in theory. And then if you're on the intelligence committees, you would potentially get briefed, but not as much as the chairs and the so-called Gang of Eight. We should note here that this would mean that those members of Congress, who we can look up and we know who they are, would have received a high level of information about David Grush's claims. In theory, they would have, but that's not to say for sure every member of the intelligence committees did, but at least most likely the so-called Gang of Eight. Let's continue with Monheim's letter, his response to the Congress members. He's basically saying that their job is to keep the Congressional Intelligence Committees informed, not just like this group of House members, right, who weren't on the intelligence committees. And anything that's in the responsibility and authority of the DNI. So he's making that clear, of course, which is understandable. But we should note here that not all intelligence programs fall under DNI. So in the blue there, we're making that distinction that the ICIG is for everything that's under the responsibility and authority of the DNI. And there could be special access programs and certain military intelligence programs that are not under this oversight. Okay. And this specifies a little bit more information about what DNI would have authority over and what special access programs are. So I'll let you pause that if you want to read that there. But all to say, basically, there could be programs not under DNI's authority that he wouldn't be allowed to by law, basically, to tell Congress about it. And so that would be an easy way for him to just not share the information, right? Is just to say that it's not required by the law. So and again, citing the law, there's restrictions, so they can't give the names of the whistleblowers, which is, of course, understandable, 100%, right? Makes sense. He can't just be giving out the names of the whistleblowers to these random Congress members. Not to call them random. Nothing. With all due respect, just not the appropriate channel of authority, which could have the legal access to more information, such as the Intelligence Committee members, as he states here quite clearly. And there's some more information there as well. Actually, an interesting detail in the bottom there, the Inspector General can't give the whistleblower's identity without their consent, unless it is deemed unavoidable. So potentially there, because we've heard David Grush say he has whistleblowers willing to cooperate. Would that mean giving the ICIG a name and saying you can tell this to Congress? I don't know. But let's move along here and keep looking at what Inspector General Monheim wrote back to Congress. All right, we have a little more legal jargon to get through here, but this is important because part of Monheim's letter was also citing a specific legal opinion of the Office of the Legal Counsel. And it basically says it's not a law, but it's a opinion, whatever that's supposed to mean, I guess. Could get more clarity there, but that individual members of Congress cannot are not allowed to. Executive branch members do not need to comply with individual members' requests of information. Okay, basically, they don't have the authority to make any member of the executive branch give them information unless they have an enforcement power like a subpoena, which requires that you appear and testify under oath as part of an investigation or otherwise hearing. In this part, we're diving into the weeds of Monheim's final paragraph back to Congress. And he's saying, as a matter of discretion, we note that we have not conducted any audit, inspection, evaluation, or review of alleged UAP programs within the responsibility and authority of the DNI that would enable this office to provide a fulsome response to your questions. Let's think about what he's really could be meaning by that, right? He's saying that there's been no audit, inspection, evaluation of these programs that would be within DNI's authority that would allow ICIG to give a response to them. That's essentially what he's saying. He's not saying these programs don't exist or that ICIG hasn't conducted some kind of review or evaluation of a program that's outside the authority of the DNI, right? And they would have had to conduct some review of alleged UAP programs in order to deem his case credible and urgent, which, according to David Grusch, was a 16-month vetting process of his case and his information. So there's different ways you could interpret that. And by asking follow-up questions, you could have the ICIG clarify what that means. And of course, to his credit, Monheim does write, please let me know if you have any questions regarding this matter. And as far as I'm aware on the official record, or any documented cases of this group of Congress members responding, I haven't seen anything. Okay, so none of them responded with any questions. And yeah, I'm kind of just thinking there like, really? Here you had a hearing. This guy told you all this stuff. You took a good first step in asking for the information. And ICIG writes back a detailed response that you could actually work with, and start to try to get more into the, all right, well, what do we need to do and what can we do within our power? Right. And instead, they never respond to ICIG Monheim. So I actually have my own questions here that I would ask if I had the opportunity to respond to Inspector General Monheim about this case, potentially, one of the biggest, if not the biggest whistleblower cases in history. And potentially something that just begins a totally different era of human history. So I think what we'll do is, before we get into those questions, we are going to, I think, start another, let's start a little break here. And we'll come back in a few seconds here. All right. We're at 30 minutes on the hour now. All right, now let's get back to the letters between Inspector General, the guy, Monheim, the guy who has all of Grush's whistleblowers, the 40 whistleblowers, has all the information. Congress asking for it. He says, hey, this is what the deal is. This is what I'm allowed to give you and how much we're really able to give you information about what you're asking for. And many of them seeming like reasonable reasons, I actually think. And so they don't ask any questions. So here's what I would ask. Are David Grush's witnesses working on alleged UAP programs that are outside the authority of the DNI, right? Special access programs, which would make sense because that's what Grush was tasked to do, was to look into the special access programs, which are in a different channel of oversight. And it may be in a different channel of oversight than the DNI. So I'd get that clarified right away. And again, this is a lawyer using careful language. He didn't say, I can't give you any further information than what you have. He said, I cannot provide a fulsome response, meaning a complete, comprehensive response to the request of the names and locations of the whistleblowers and individuals involved in the programs. But there's so many other questions you could ask on top of that. So, like, I would have just been like, what kind of information can you give us? And then maybe follow up with that, with specific requests. I would ask why, they said they didn't conduct an audit of any programs under authority of DNI. I would get clarity on that. I would say, why did you not conduct them? Is there a specific reason why you haven't conducted an audit, inspection, or evaluation on the programs that were deemed credible and urgent by David Grush? Is it because they're just special access programs? I don't know. But you could have asked the question. And, and here's something else I would say. We understand you cannot provide the names of the whistleblowers, but can you provide us with the details of their testimony? Any details, any further information? And who knows what you would get, right? And I would also be asking, right, this question, which is, Monheim's basically saying, hey, my job is to inform the congressional intelligence committees. And that's where I prioritize sharing information about this. And those are the channels I'm authorized to do through by the laws. And so really the question that I would ask and we should be asking is, why haven't those intelligence committees had a hearing yet? The hearings are coming from, groups, caucuses of groups in Congress, in the House, and then you have Gillibrand in the Senate overseeing Arrow, but really what's going on there? In any event, after 6 months or so, Congress finally does get a briefing from Thomas Monheim in January of 2024. And in January 2024, Monheim briefs Congress in a classified skiff, and this is the first time about details about Grush's whistleblower case. And for the most part, most people come out of there saying that the case is serious. It's a very serious topic was one of the quotes, but still some people saying that it wasn't really revealing all that much. And here is direct quotes from the New York Times, which, to their credit, at least the New York Times covered that this briefing took place. I mean, that's actually surprising. They usually don't cover this. The mainstream newspapers don't. Of course, the Times has that huge role played in the 2017 article, but that's a different story. And the Times article basically just reports that the people that were in the briefing, for the most part, realized that Grush's claims were credible and serious. And, and then surprise, surprise, intelligence officials declined to comment on the classified briefing. A representative of Mr. Monheim's office also declined to comment. So, even the New York Times asking for a comment from the office is getting nothing, which is pretty interesting as well. And then, of course, all right, we're talking about what the government's doing, but what's the media doing to pursue this idea that Dave Grush has 40 whistleblowers? I mean, these people are out there, right? And that leads me to a question: what happened to Michael Schellenberger? He is an independent journalist, but had some prominence on the kind of independent investigative journalist thread, and he somehow got multiple of these firsthand whistleblower witnesses to talk to him shortly after David Grush's interview dropped, and he came out and spoke publicly for the first time on the News Nation, and then at the hearing weeks later. So, and Schellenberger had this article of firsthand witnesses, and they all told him that they had 12 recovered craft, and there was direct quotes. He couldn't name any of them, right? And one of them was described as a kind of strange shaped craft that another whistleblower who's come out, but really hasn't been as verified, say, as David Grusch, at least yet at this point, Jason Sands, seems that he might have been one of the witnesses that was interviewed in Schellenberger's anonymous article. But what's really interesting to me, right, is the last bullet point there, which is that why did Michael Schellenberger fall completely off the map on this topic? As far as I last checked, I haven't seen any coverage from him on this issue.
Yeah, I had to splice this in here real quick. Waking up this morning, I made this video yesterday, and then at the same time, Michael Schellenberger just came out with the first article in the longest time and has this new information on whistleblowers. So it's pretty funny how things work sometimes. So anyway, as of now, the next day, he did finally report on something.
Literally last night, this interview dropped on News Nation with Russ Coulthart with none other than Michael Schellenberger, right? And he did finally, just yesterday, release an article about, and which is having some information from another whistleblower. And this has to do with a program that is called Immaculate Constellation, allegedly, and is about the reverse engineering crash retrieval program. So I just had to interject with this brief snippet here to just say the information I'm covering in the video right now, as of hours later, is no longer, up to date, because literally as I was making the video, Schellenberger apparently finally released something. So let's get back to what I was talking about as of yesterday, about the hearings or about anything else. And yet these whistleblowers were talking to him that close around Grush's claim. That's pretty wild. And, into some of my thoughts there on the bottom, did someone put a muzzle on the whistleblowers? Someone put a muzzle on Schellenberger, or both, right? Probably most likely the latter. So I was thinking of skipping this slide, but I think I will actually just share the thought. It's just more something that came up in my mind, something to think about. When the whole thing was happening with David Grusch, it was like 40 whistleblowers, and then boom, Schellenberger's article was like the insiders talking and saying that there was 12 spacecraft recovered. And that was really the only article that's ever been published that has these anonymous whistleblowers talking, except for the debrief article, which quoted the guy, Jonathan Gray, who I guess no one knows who that is yet. Anyway, what this is, right, is a theory, right? But it was interesting. And this is from the book, The Biggest Secret. And this was basically, there was a chapter looking at, through the ancient texts, the use of the numbers 40 and 12, and having a connection to one of these ancient secret societies is the argument, the claim that David Icke puts forward in this book, which is interesting to think about, and that this was some type of Babylonian Brotherhood network from like ancient Sumer back in the day. Anyway, right, this is totally not anything that I'm throwing out here to be like, this is real or true, but it's just a thought of those numbers appearing, and maybe that's just meaningful in some way. I don't know how. Speaking of numbers, let's talk numbers for the hearing that is coming up now. And let's finish off here on thinking about when they're coming, because it's going to be basically like in a month, November 13th. Thinking about the upcoming hearings in the context of David Grush's 40 witnesses, these comments were exchanged in a rare moment of David Grush having any kind of public statement. And I believe it was put out somewhere. I don't want to say for sure it was put out on Twitter or X, but I believe that's where it was put out. And he basically said that Senator Gillibrand, who'll be chairing the Arrow hearing supposedly this fall, that she hasn't even looked at his witness list. And at that time when this exchange was going on, Gillibrand said she's discovered no basis that there's a secret program, but she's only heard investigation, as far as we can tell from the comments and the information, is that her only information is from Arrow, who's been the body denying that there's anything at all going on, and which is pretty much, you can conclude has been a instrument of prolonging the cover-up for the time being. But the House hearing hopefully will be different. Again, we saw that clip early in the video today where Nancy Manchin, she's not beating around the bush, right? She's getting to the point of it. So you saw craft, you saw bodies. How? What did you see? Where are they? Simple way to do it. And that's a good sign that she's chairing the next hearing. I think something's got to come out of it. We just have to be mindful of how it is spun by the media. Always have to be. And in the second bullet point here, who are these witnesses going to be? And we've heard Tim Burchett on the record speak to News Nation and say, last time we had more witnesses and they were threatened and called off appearing. And he's saying that on the record, you know what I mean? And he even implied that NASA was involved, which is interesting. So what's happening this time, right? Are they going to find out about the witnesses and scare them away? And will any of these witnesses be from David Grush's 40? I've heard some people speculate, say maybe there'll be 4 witnesses this time. Last time we saw 3. I think that is normally the focus, is to kind of have a smaller number in one hearing. And really what I think should happen is these should carry out over a number of months and years, as long as is needed, and let the information parse out that way, rather than like a 9-person review board with executive branch authority to postpone records indefinitely, which to me seems like definitely something that should be avoided. Let's now reflect on some thoughts about where is David Grush, and then some final thoughts to wrap up the video here. So, where's David Grush? Right after he came out with the interview, did the hearing, he was, appearing publicly. He was giving interviews to News Nation and speaking about how this was an important issue, being very professional and serious about it. And then they stopped interviewing him. He's kind of fallen off the map. And who knows? I mean, he's already said under oath that he was threatened. He'd already said him and his wife faced some very disturbing scenarios related to, retaliation against him. So there's all that. And, the second bullet point, he was supposedly writing this op-ed piece. He was supposedly writing a piece that was going to give more information than he's been able to give so far at the hearing and the interviews he's done. But that's been delayed now for almost a year, I believe, almost going on a year. And when are we going to see that? And what will it say in it, right? And to my third bullet point here, how is it possible that no one has interviewed his witnesses and taken any kind of action from there? We saw Schellenberger, but then no other journalists have been able to speak to these. I know maybe perhaps George Knapp has gotten, or Christopher Sharp perhaps gotten some anonymous comments, but nothing really substantial, and nothing from the major media. But forget about the media for a second. Let's go back and talk about the government, the intelligence committees, who would get all the information that they would want on Grush. At least the chairs and co-chairs would. And you're telling me you just can't interview these people and then figure out what's going on and do what needs to be done, right? They're still working on the program currently, according to Grush under oath. So it makes you think, what exactly is being covered up? Because basically the cover-up is a fact at this point, that something's being covered up, and we can accept that as a basic premise here. All right, let's talk final thoughts here on this whole inquiry that we went on today here about where are Grush's 40 witnesses, where are the whistleblowers? And really, for me, the biggest takeaways was looking into Inspector General Monheim's background and seeing that there are some red flags there. The ties to the international financial and corporate institutions and tightly associated with the gas and oil and energy law. And obviously that would have implications with UFO disclosure, whatever that looks like. And but at the same time, right, that and then his working on the Bush administration, which we know the Bushes have been on the side of like covering up the UFO topic, right? So it makes you think, and an Air Force background as well, because Air Force has historically been overall, I would say, the most implicated in the cover-up of the military branches, as far as, the majority of the literature would suggest. And lastly, given all that, why did he greenlight Grush's case? Don't we think that he could have easily gotten Grush's whistleblower case and said, this is wild stuff. You're talking about crashed non-human intelligence, biologics, and spaceships being recovered and reverse engineered in secret by the government, right? Monheim, serious guy like that. Huge job, very high, powerful attorney job inside the intelligence community of the United States military and government. Could have easily just said these are not credible or urgent. But he deemed them credible and urgent. So we have to acknowledge that and think about, why would he do that? And as I said before, why hasn't the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Committee on Intelligence opened up official investigations? This seems like a no-brainer. They've been briefed since 2022 is what the documentation shows. So they've had time to realize the severity of this. And even as co-chair of the Intelligence Committee, Marco, of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Marco Rubio, has stated publicly multiple times that whatever it is, whether this is some crazy psyop or something, he hasn't called it that, but he's kind of implying that, like some type of psychological operation, or whether it's real, we have to get to the bottom of which one it is, right? And obviously, it's probably both, as Grush himself had said. And again, people aren't talking about that as much. That part of Grush's whistleblower claim is the, decades-long sophisticated disinformation campaign targeting the American public, which he called, quote, highly unethical and immoral. So what does that really entail? And I think the hearings need to focus on this. And what's going to happen at that hearing. And again, on that point, right? Why does it seem like the intelligence committees of Congress are not involved with this upcoming November 13th hearing? Because they are the ones that, according to the documentation, are the most briefed on the topic. So it would make sense that if the U.S. Congress is actually having a public hearing about it, those people should be involved. The chairs, the co-chairs, or other members of the committee. But at this point, I haven't heard one of those members of the intelligence committees being involved with this hearing, which really, for me, makes me pause and think, like, what is actually going on if they know so much more, too, about these other members that are holding this public hearing. And yeah, it's interesting. Senate Intelligence Committee Chair Mark Warner, it's interesting. You hear things that rumors that he's going to have these Senate hearings like happened with the Church Committee in the 70s and so forth, but doesn't seem like any action from those that would know the most, as Monheim's letter made it clear to us. So wow, yeah, I guess that's where it brings us in our investigation of this question. Where are Grush's whistleblowers? In other words, what happened to, what about Grush's witness list, right? And yeah, hopefully some of this information will be useful for you out there in putting together pieces of the puzzle, just being more informed about this topic, that really the press should be all over the details of this and helping to put some pressure on uncovering more. I mean, that's supposed to be part of the role of the media, the so-called, fourth estate, but we know that it's largely compromised. Anyway, thank you for watching. Ride out on some tunes here, and have a great day. Yeah, we'll see you in the next one.